Great. I think we are set then. And I think without much further ado, I'd like to hand over to Hala, who together with Henrique and Emmanuel are the facilitators behind conceptualizing and producing this co-learning and advocacy space. So Hala, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yolande. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We welcome you once again to the third session of our meeting. I hope that you have enjoyed during the past period. And also, I hope you enjoyed the material on the Google Classroom. I would like to thank all those who interacted with us, answering the questions we posed through the site where the questions were posted. We received many answers about the three main questions related to the legal frameworks governing advocacy based on human rights in our countries, and also the names of some of the campaigns that you have participated in your countries or that were part of your work inside your organizations. And many of these campaigns were shared, and we enjoyed reading the answers. The third question was about the obstacles and challenges that may be part of the processes or that may stand or hinder the processes that you undertake. I'm sorry, I cannot hear her. I just would like to ask Nadine to share with us the slides in order for us to present the general idea of the answers. I would like to thank all those who participated with us from Indonesia, Argentina, Bolivia, Yemen, Cameroon, Zimbabwe, all those who answered these questions. The answers from Indonesia said that there were 8 main treaties that Indonesia signed, and for them they were important, particularly those that had to do with canceling all forms of discrimination. Also, the law in Indonesia also is based on human rights. There were 3 main answers: to prevent crime, international agreements to protect all immigrant workers, as well as the national constitution, the Universal Declaration, and the American Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on cultural and social rights, as well as political and civil rights, were mentioned by many of the respondents. And also that war crimes should not fall with time. Costa Rica, there is a special agreement, I believe, and also there is an agreement to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women, and agreement against torture. From Yemen, there was an answer item having to do with the protocols, instruments, with a focus on the special laws, local laws of the country that allow to a great extent issues of human rights. In Bolivia also, the advocacy based on the human rights was mentioned in the Bolivian constitution, started in 2009. From Bolivia also, there was talking about the laws that the agreements, special agreements that the country has signed. This is with relation to the first question in total, and to be To be honest, I was very happy with this range of answers to the questions. There were answers in various languages, Spanish, English, and Arabic. We tried to summarize them. With relation to the second question, it was about certain um, limited campaigns, the most prominent of which was a beautiful campaign written in Spanish. It is the campaign of our neighbors, our rights, our cities to improve the neighborhoods and the popular housing, to promote local procedures, promote strategic work, and to have regional recommendations. And also for rehabilitation after the pandemic, we need to listen more about this campaign. I believe it is very interesting. There was also the provision of dignified housing for everyone. This was another campaign. There was another campaign um, called Asual. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. This organization has done a lot of work about the right of housing, also the land rights that restricted some rights. However, there were also practices on the level of the grassroots that raise reports to the judiciary. And this is one important level of advocacy that reaches the judiciary, the local judiciary, working as a committee with civil society, particularly with relation to um, uh, evictions. There was also a campaign in Cameroon that sought to promote and protect the basic rights in cooperation with the National Council for the Defense of Human Rights, which is the main authority in Cameroon that is in charge of the employers' activities or that work with the stakeholders, because they were given the authority to follow up human rights issues, and they issue recommendations, reports, and opinions. However, they do not do that. They were given this mandate, but unfortunately, this National Council does not do this, as the participant from Cameroon tells us, but they issue also non-obliging rulings. As a well organization, I believe it is also interesting from Cameroon, and I hope that we can hear more about these campaigns in the future. In the third question also, if we move to the third question quickly, it talked about the obstacles, what stands in our way mainly and prevents us from achieving our objectives, the poor financial resources, the lack of information that helps to establish these campaigns, the poor planning. But the participant from Yemen says that all this is not important if there is enough financing to organize the campaign. And there was also the lack to the political will, one of the obstacles that were mentioned, that there is no real political will. Civil society also needs promotion to organize about challenges and more structural solutions in order to move forward in solving the problems according to strong political advocacy that is participatory among everyone. The main obstacle was the difficulty of reaching decision-making authorities, but there should be attention with the authority that gave attention to human rights. They are talking about a country that there was no stability, and now there is stability. The last point had to do with the lack of empowerment for the youth in advocacy. as well as the lack of participation, that there is not enough participation to have strong campaigns and strong advocacy. This is what we received from you. I thank you once more, and I leave the comments to my colleagues, Areli and Enrique, if I had missed anything important while presenting these questions. Thank you once again.
Muchas gracias, Hala. Shukran por este grandioso trabajo.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for the way in which you have summarized, systematized the answers for the exercise that we proposed during the last session. You did it wonderfully. I have nothing else to add. However, perhaps if we have a few minutes, we could have a small feedback or debate. So I would like to ask all of our participants to feel free to comment. To begin with, what I would like to say is that here in this group of participants, they are very different realities. There are some people who live in countries that are in conflict, like in the case of Yemen, or last session, we also learned about Palestine when there's war and conflict. But there are some other countries that even though there's not a declared conflict, there is other types of challenges. At least they have some acknowledgement of international conventions on human rights. This is a situation that happens a lot in Latin America. By reading the answers of our Latin American colleagues, we could assume that in most of the countries in the region, there are agreements, international agreements that have been undersigned by the governments. And even the national constitutions acknowledge the human rights we are entitled to. However, the obstacles remain. There's a difference between the theory and the practice, so the difficulties and how to exercise the rights. The example of Bolivia, it's very meaningful because I believe this happens in other places as well. Somebody told us that when you analyze local legislation, you would see that the drafting, the writing is not translated into an actual commitment in the actions in the defense of human rights. So this is something worth discussing. Those international agreements that are signed by the countries, they are obliging local authorities, because even if it's a federation or a decentralized state, like in the case of Brazil, if the country has undersigned, everyone is obliged to respect human rights, because this is something that is binding to all of the authorities at all levels. So this is something that I bring to the table. Thank you. I completely agree. Let us hear from our participants. The only comment that I have now that Hala has asked me to share the floor, sometimes we see that there is a concern that there are certain countries in which there has been an undersigning and a ratifying of all human rights conventions and agreements. However, the obstacle for us to do our advocacy and to make certain that they're complied with is that there's a lack of willingness of the national, state, local, municipal governments at all levels. Politicians don't have an alignment between what the states have assumed as an obligation and how they're putting into practice those obligations in daily practice. So that is why it is so important, even in those countries where there's been a ratifying of the documents or the national constitutions and laws, acknowledge them. We should also insist, we should always insist on the advocacy with a human rights perspective, because it is not enough for them to have an acknowledgement in the writing. Hello, good morning. I'm sorry, I'm using my mobile and I couldn't find the option to raise my hand, but may I say something? Yes, I would like to tell you about the case of Mexico. From the HIC Latin American office, some Mexican organizations, we gather around this, well, 3 years, because with the pandemic, I lost all track of time, but we carried out a campaign to promote the use of natural resources, natural raw materials from the local communities. And we did this because traditional houses in Mexico, they're disappearing. Traditional houses are being replaced because of changes in public policies in terms of constructions. As of the 1980s, private companies were allowed to come and build what they call a social type of housing or a low-income type of housing. And the government just supervises, if you may, those constructions. Sometimes the government also finances popular housing projects. So private entities started to build these blocks of homogenized, standardized houses that didn't respect the customs of the inhabitants. And even in the rural areas, now people are adopting tradition, the mainstream practices. However, the resources that were used for traditional house building were much more environmentally friendly and reasonable for the areas. What we've seen is that in the rural areas, the mere fact that there's still a social ownership of the land, that is to say, a collective ownership, what we call in Spanish an ejido. There are collective owners of the land, so they work on the land, and that's where they get their materials to build their houses, the sand, the bricks, the clay. This is managed by the collective under the figure of the ejido. But this type of ownership, which is a 53% of all total assets or buildings in the country, we're losing it very quickly because of mainstream construction practices. And even though in the Constitution it is stated that the communal ownership of the land should be respected, it is not happening in the practice. And so the ability of people to build their own houses and the traditional housing practices that were natural, environmentally friendly, everything has been lost. So the campaign that we organized was to protect those traditional building practices to be rescued, because the materials are less expensive. They promote local economies. They the natural materials are less toxic. They have they're much more friendly, as I said. The traditional building practices, we would like to have a larger awareness campaign so that we use those natural construction materials. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, the campaign was stopped and we have not gone back to it. But it is important for us to insist on this so that people can know how important it is to keep the communal ownership of the land and our traditional building practices. And now, since there's so much tourism in my country, many extractivist companies are plundering the resources from rural areas. So many people are just selling their land to private entities. There's an important threat into the future because these people, they are losing their lands and their houses because of this. Thank you. Also, before I conclude, it's not a problem with the law. The law is perfect, but the problem is that people lack knowledge and understanding that they have a right to a dignified housing structure. And so it is important for us to keep local building construction materials alive. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Lucas, por favor.
Lucas, please go ahead.
Vous me suivez? Allô?
Hello, can you hear me?
Tout le monde. D'accord.
Très bien,
Alors,
merci.
je prends la parole pour intervenir.
I want to take the floor to talk about habitat related to the law. In the case of Cameroon, I think that I had explained it a little bit in the answer that I have submitted to your question. The problem of the law is not there. I think that our states, at least Cameroon, has laws according to that because it ratified international standards regarding habitat. So, architecture legally and is there, but the problem that we have is a lack of efficiency of the law or of those treaties. How can we make that set of laws, international and local laws, to be implemented locally? Things regarding political will that somebody mentioned a while ago, it has to do with public powers. The law is not serving the people it is supposed to be helping. So advocacy has to have another orientation or approach. We need to give advocacy to have its place to discuss all those texts. Classic advocacy is to be trying to have an influence at a government level, and that is a long-term fight. But we need to focus also on a specific and concrete actions throughout this advocacy. That is why we have to go and give civil society to undertake certain initiatives. For instance, cooperatives for habitat. That is an organism that can fulfill that policy. And the organization of cooperatives or accompanying those cooperatives will be important. So if we want to use local construction materials, because when we talk about financing, it is not only somebody that can be talking about this, because we need to stop violating habitat rights. Civil society, cooperatives have already found a part of the solution, doing the promotion of local construction materials, as our colleague from Brazil or sister from Brazil has mentioned. And the question is, how can we undertake our advocacy through action in order to open the door to economic action for habitat? Economic access to habitat, things that cannot be solved by the text, but can be solved through the organization inside the cooperatives. But I think that that's a type of advocacy, a new type of orientation or approach. We have to have an efficient and efficacy in our organization through action. The texts are there, they exist, but we still have people that suffer. So what is our responsibility if we are advocates for habitat rights. So we need to create public forces so government can accompany all these texts with actions through civil society and organize local organizations in order to standardize or create a balance.
Et ses possibilités. Voilà la petite contribution que je voulais apporter cet après-midi. Bon, nous sommes ici au Cameroun dans l'après-midi.
We are
Merci.
here in Cameroon right now, so thank you so much.
Muchas gracias a ti, Lucas, por esta contribución muy valiosa.
Lucas, thanks so much to you. And now we are going to give the floor to Silvia. She has raised her hand. And then we are going to listen to our guest. Silvia, you have the floor. Good morning to all of you. My regards from Lima, Peru. We work in the project that is called Ciudad Mujer. It's building the political agenda for women in Lima. This is a political tool in which women in the city collaborated along with other partnerships and alliances of women that work in this region. We wanted to have a metropolitan agenda integrating different organizations from Lima that work with sustainable development affairs, political participation of women, the citizens' participation, no discrimination, and the fight against violence against women. So this is part of our current law, but at a local and at a metropolitan level, they haven't been implemented yet. In this participatory work, we have found a great response from women's organizations that used to work in a disarticulated manner. But now, according to this political agenda, they are promoting it without disregarding their work and without disregarding their active participation with NGOs that support them. Our main challenge is that we are just starting the municipal electoral campaign. So for this, it's a great time to look for alliances with other participants that have the same approach. As our previous speaker mentioned, the law is there, is written, however, it's not yet implemented, it's not effective. But then we can talk with other colleagues. At the end of every session, we talk to them to see how organizations can have elements and tools to reach agreements with political parties in this beginning of the electoral campaign for the metropolitan government. This is great advocacy work that will allow us to have changes. So hopefully organizations could have a close link with political decision makers. We think that this space allows us to think about how we can overcome different issues, and we will share this information with other civil organizations of women that are not here, but they are being participating through me. So thank you so much for all your input and your help. Thank you so much for your consideration to collaborate with other organizations. We have been moving forward with the agenda, and now it's a good time to tell you that today the purpose, the intent of this meeting is to link what we discussed last time regarding human rights treaties and agreements with other arenas, with other processes that are international. that we call Sustainable Development Goals. We are learning a lot about environmental issues, the new urban agenda, the commitment with gender equity development. We are talking about the 2030 agenda of SDGs. So even though these are global commitments, they occur in other spaces of international organizations. So the idea today is to interconnect all these issues with the last week meetings to present progresses and limits of political advocacy in your countries regarding human rights, to connect all this with the global agenda of SDGs. So today, it is a pleasure for us to have two dear presenters, Samuel Orlando from Kenya. He will be the first presenter. Samuel is Executive Director of Amaja Trust, an important organization in Kenya. He is going to be talking about the work that they are doing on the SDGs. Samuel has long years of experiences working with political advocacy processes like the right to land, the right to a decent housing, urban spaces, legislation, and human rights. And he has an interesting background. He is urban sociologist with a master's degree in this field. Samuel is a law professor. So recently, or pretty soon, he is going to be my colleague as a lawyer, besides these urban matters. So after Samuel, we are going to give the floor to our dear Lorena Zarate. He is an activist for the rights of land and house, coordinator for the HIC Latin American office. She was the previous chair of the coalition. So we are very glad to have the former chair and Adriana, the current chair of the coalition. So it is quite an honor to have both of you here with us today. We are going to give the floor to Samuel, and then we are going to have some time for Q&A and to receive your feedback. Later on, we are going to give the floor to Lorena. We are going to have some time for discussion. And at the end, we are going to have some space to talk about political advocacy opportunities. We have mapped some opportunities for this year. So Samuel, you have the floor. It is quite an honor for us to have you here.
Thank you very much, Enrique. What a great introduction you've given me this evening. I very much appreciate. I don't know, how many minutes do I have?
Um, 20 minutes we assigned you, I think.
Thank you so much for that. Then I'd share my screen for purposes of allowing colleagues to share with me the reflections that I have today. And just to give a brief background is that Orlando Samuel has introduced, I serve at Pamoja Trust. We are a national civil society organization. And it's my hope that my reflections this evening or this morning, depending with where you are, shall generate debate and also be able to allow us to share experiences. So I'm going to basically attempt to address the three questions. And the three questions that I'm going to speak to are related to the global development agendas from a human rights-based approach, how this we can strengthen advocacy strategies for implementation. I'm also going to seek to draw advocacy lessons from civil society experiences, particularly how this is related to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals and the New Urban Agenda. And lastly, we shall seek to identify multi-level advocacy opportunities towards the global development agendas, which Enrique has very well elaborated. And in understanding this particular conversation, I had reflections. And the reflections that I had was to support us in understanding the challenge. And the challenge that Sustainable Development Goals and the New Urban Agenda seek to respond to. I did segment this into 4. And my interpretation is that the conventional planning methods have systematically resulted into various manifestations. And the first one is that the skewed planning that has led to a lot of spatial inequality. Number 2 is that there's poor social service delivery that has been, a manifestation of the dominant planning methods. Number 3 is that we, as a people, have suffered a lot of cultural erasure, which has, in a way, also led to economic exclusion. And when you look across board, you look at standard social mobility and the inability for integrated communities that then grow, and that people are economically included, and that their cultural rights are respected, and that this dignity in access to basic services, and that planning is planning regimes that enhance inclusion. And when you read the Sustainable Development Goals, you will notice that it speaks to what my interpretation as the challenge is, particularly within the urban areas that as an organization we work in. So you look at urban areas now, then what you notice are a majority of citizens being disadvantaged and high levels of inequality, but also the misgovernance and the crisis of meaning and identity. And that our identity is now marred with a lot of exclusion and discrimination. Now, in interpreting Sustainable Development Goals, what are the priority challenges that as partners we should reflect upon when we engage with Sustainable Development Goals? What is the place of the functioning and skewed planning? What is the place of poor service delivery? What is the place of economic exclusion? And the levers to drive change. What is the place of strategic planning within Sustainable Development Goals and the goals that we are aligned to as partners? What is the space of social planning that enhances and appreciates the place of communities as innovators and as consumers of plans and government services, as being the drivers and of change that they so wish to have? And that the ideal outcome perhaps is having inclusionary planning practice, having access to basic services and infrastructure, and having inclusive economies. And the mantra that has been with the New Urban Agenda is that of not leaving anyone behind, and that the values that cut across become values of inclusivity, values of public participation, values of elasticity that appreciate social planning, values of adaptiveness that appreciate, again, social planning, values of mutuality that appreciate social planning, values of reciprocity that is reflected in strategic planning, and values of flexibility that, again, appreciate social planning. When we look at our communities today, and in the spirit of the New Urban Agenda that majority of governments have committed to, is that we seek to have institutionalized mechanisms for civic engagement that in a way will facilitate positive governance, government responsiveness to citizens, and in particularly to us and in people who are living in people settlements or informal settlements. And if I was in Kenya, then I would say that the values that I did speak about and that I also reflected in the various sustainable development goals and also reflected in the new urban agenda should then have its spirit in planning documents that we have at the local government level, but also at the national level. And if I was to speak about Kenya, then I would start speaking about the county integrated development plans. I would speak about the annual development plans, and I'll speak about the budget estimates. And that elements of forced evictions that is interpreted in the context of the dominant, traditional planning regimes that has led to a lot of exclusion, then should not lead to forced evictions, but the public interest being at the heart of it, and that community become at the center of an advocacy network that seek to have these institutionalized mechanisms for civic engagement and the operationalization of the global commitments, be it the Sustainable Development Goals or be it the new urban agenda. And I wanted to share with us, what, as an organization, we seek to do, but also how, the domestication of these commitments at the local. I know that majority of the organizations represented on this platform today do a lot of capacity strengthening and training of communities. We do a lot of mapping of issues jointly with communities. We do a lot of data entry and analysis with communities. We take communities through validation. We take communities through engagement with stakeholders. We take communities through planning and consultations. But to what extent are the documents that we engage with adopt the values that I did speak about that should, cut across when we speak about sustainable development goals and when we speak about new urban agenda? And how will they lead to the ideal outcome? To what extent are they inclusive? To what extent are they are the national frameworks allowing public participation, allowing elasticity of these plans, adaptiveness, mutuality, reciprocity, and flexibility? I say that because in many occasions, nations domesticate and develop national action plans to inform the realizations of the global commitments that they have undertaken within the Sustainable Development Goals or within the new urban agenda. You will kindly allow me to skip that slide. And I did take an example.
Sorry, we are just getting some information that your sound is fading. If you could just speak into the microphone so that our interpreters can hear, that'll be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much
for interrupting. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Hopefully that's better now.
Yes, that's clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I wanted to share with us the reflections on bridging the gap. And in bridging the gap is identifying community needs and tracing these needs into the global commitments that as a nation or that as a people the country has committed to, be it in the Sustainable Development Goals or be it in the new urban agenda. So that when we engage with the Sustainable Development Goals, then we look at Sustainable Development Goals within the lens of the communities whom we partner with. For instance, the question that we seek to answer at Pamoja Trust is, what is the place of social tenure relationship that communities have with their lands in the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, what are the user rights? What are the occupancy rights? What are the ownership? What's the place of informality? What's the place of customary tenure? What is the place of tenancy? You know, what's the place of the spatial units that communities have? What are the places of supporting documents that communities develop as a basis of having security of tenure reflected in country level action plans in the implementation of the global commitment that the nation has made? And I'd request that we follow this because I'll link it with the national level frameworks and the regional and international reporting mechanisms and how this particular approach should relate to that. So that then when we read that as partners, then we break it down and start having it reflected in, you know, community action plans, in the local government action plan, and in the national government action plans. And this is just an illustration of community processes and how at a local level, communities can engage with the local government authorities and national government platforms, and have this reflected in the global commitments, as I had mentioned earlier. That should not be the other way around, where the global commitments come to meet the community needs, but the community needs informing the global commitments and informing the development of action plans towards, you know, fulfillment of these commitments that nations make. And communities taking charge of their visioning, identifying who the actors are, identifying the location and the timelines. In many occasions, when you look at the global commitments that nations make, they normally have timelines. But we seldom, at the national and at the subnational level, action plans have these timelines reflected, you know, so that then the country will go and report, but the report is normally, in many occasions, very numerical. It never takes into consideration the quality of life, you know, the values that it embeds, so that then it's in most occasions brick and mortar. It does not take into context, you know, the values and how much it impacts on the lives of communities in terms of access to the basic needs that they so wish. So then, can we in our programming then attempt to change so that then we start interpreting the global commitments on the basis of community level needs and have that reflected in the frameworks and how we report to the frameworks as civil society organizations and how we engage with the frameworks, be it the New Urban Agenda or be it the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, in operationalizing Sustainable Development Goals and the New Urban Agenda in Kenya, we've taken as a nation two particular fronts. Now, these fronts have been in the context of urban renewal and regeneration program, and secondly, on the infrastructural development programs. On urban renewal and regeneration programs, what should we ought to influence? This is a framework based on what communities feel planning should be. And it's an adaptive way of communities engaging with, you know, global commitments like the Sustainable Development Goals, like the New Urban Agenda, and interpreting it to an adaptive model of planning. When you look at our regulatory framework, it does not reflect this as a nation. But based on practices and innovations of the communities, we have been able to document what an adaptive settlement planning model should be, and it takes this form jointly with communities. So that when we engage with the reporting frameworks in the global commitments, then yes, we will complain about the violations, but give the platforms this alternative, that planning regimes should take this particular approach. This is the alternative to the problem that we face as a people. So that when recommendations are made to the national level, then recommendations are made on the basis of what works, on the basis of values that the communities, the values that as non-state actors, the values that as a people we believe in, and that sometimes are reflected in our national and subnational regulatory framework. In infrastructure development programs, and this takes an interesting turn, we are developing a lot of road networks in Kenya now, and this has been the cause of a lot of forced evictions that we noticed in the urban areas, particularly the capital city and the other 3 cities. Most of these programs are funded by multinational, institutions, be it the World Bank, be it the African Development Bank, and many more. And we are arguing that there is a different way. Yes, we've made global commitments that we are going to improve lives and livelihoods of people living in people's settlements. We are going to enhance mobility. We are going to construct social houses. We are going to make access to sewer lines and such. But then how do we do it? Are there social dimensions to infrastructure? And we went to document some of the programs that have been supported in the guise of not leaving anyone behind in terms of infrastructure development. And we did document what we call the life of a road infrastructure in Kenya. It starts with the project conception, then step 2, we go to the project planning and feasibility, then step 3, we go to the first preliminary designing, then we go to now the implementation bit. But we noticed that step 1 at the project conception, the people who should be the consumers of these global commitments and the financing elements are not involved, that they are engaged at the project implementation stage. And that's why that we now start seeing the World Bank coming with their social safeguard policies, be it resettlement action plans. But communities are not engaged at the project conception stage, so that then we map out the potential effects of this road infrastructure as we conceive. That majority of our nations have got this project conceived and are lying somewhere in the office and waiting for resources to come from these development partners. Then they start engaging the communities when they're implementing. Then the result will be forced evictions. So when we report to this global communities, what do we do then as an organization? We take this particular framework and use it as a basis of engaging and saying that in Kenya, we've seen a lot of cases of forced evictions. And in our analysis, this is where the problem is. That the problem is with the infrastructural project conception stage. That can we start engaging with the project conception stage and make it adaptive and have inclusivity in it and make it elastic and allow public participation in it as we conceive. So that then this then come back to the nation as a concluding observation or as an observation to improve on project conceptualization, but also on the policy framework. Then now communities turn into monitoring and ensuring that the commitments that we make are then reflected in programs that seek to improve their lives. I did try to enumerate some of the safeguard tools which communities and civil society organizations should pay attention to in that particular framing and when engaging, and also seeking to engage with the global commitments and also the reporting frameworks, like the project appraisal reports, the stakeholder engagement plans and communication strategies, the labor management strategies, the child protection strategies, the corporate social responsibility plan, the livelihood restoration plan, the resource sharing plan, the counter gender-based violence and protection plan, the HIV and AIDS prevention and awareness policy, and the grievance redress and alternative justice systems mechanisms. And why is this important to us as civil society organizations? And I just need to mention that the documentation of these processes, we did go to government authorities, the Kenya Urban Roads Authority, the Kenya National Highway Authority, and documented their practices to inform this, so that then when we appraise the processes, then we engage with where the weakness is. And this is important because in most occasions, we seldom as civil society organizations want to engage with our government authorities and seek to change the culture from within. So that even as we engage with the global commitments that also at the national level, when we develop the county action plan, then these are reflected within the county action plans. So that then they also have the ability to interpret it from a human rights-based lens. Sometimes, you know, there are governments that have stayed for over 50 years. It's a culture. Then how do we change the culture if you do not get inside, learn how they think, and then change the perception, so that even as we engage with the global, these global commitments, then we support government in also being better, you know. So, should we really think on how to engage the regional and international reporting mechanisms? I think we should. You know, when you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, be it the Committee on Economic and the Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, be it the Committee on Rights of the Child, be it the International Committee, the Committee on Economic and Cultural Rights, and these other committees and the conventions, be it the monitoring frameworks within the Sustainable Development Goals, be it the monitoring framework of the new urban agenda. So that when Committee on Economic and Cultural Rights make recommendations to the nation, then the shadow report that we will have submitted as civil society organizations has got an alternative to the best practices. So that when we say that there are high cases of forced evictions occasioned by infrastructural development programs, then we say that the remedy to this is implementing the stakeholder engagement framework that interprets infrastructure in this and this and this manner. So that the concluding observations then come saying that we suggest to the nation to implement the following framework in this and this manner. Then we start following the policy conversations. And that will give us an opportunity to then now start also strengthening our systems and our institutions and domestication of, you know, of the best practices. And also in a way, it will change the culture. And this is also key because in many occasions, as members of the civil society organizations, we've been demonized by the state agencies as having a very clear analysis of what the problem is, but we seldom want to engage with what the solution should be. So that this will give us an opportunity now to take the conversation further and give the solutions, a solution to challenges that we see in communities, and, you know, support government in thinking through them, in developing strategies of addressing them, and many more. I hope I've not taken more than 20 minutes, but how do we influence how do we use the shadow reports? How do we use the concluding observations, monitoring and implementation processes? How do we engage with the state agencies, and you know, how do we bring them to the fore to change the culture and perception and influence the county action plans? So that will be the end of my presentation, and I shall be very glad to engage with colleagues. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a ti, Samuel. Muy interesante.
Thank you, Samuel. Your presentation has been very interesting. I think that you've spoken about the methodology. You have spoken about how to do political incidents and different learnings on how to engage with the communities from those Sustainable Development Commitments. Thank you very much for that rich presentation. I would like to ask now the participants, and Samuel, you as well, I would like to ask you, could we now listen to Lorena for 20 minutes, and then together you'll have a Q&A, so that we first, is that okay? Can you stay here for the Q&A later? Excellent. All right, because in that way, we can also guarantee that there'll be a way into which connecting both presentations. Now, Lorena, she has plenty of experience with community development in Mexico. She was also coordinator of the HIC Latin American office. She was the president of HIC. And during the last few years, she's been a co-coordinator of the Global Platform for the Right to a City. Lorena will speak about the experience of the global platform and the engagement of different stakeholders to do political advocacy. It's a pleasure, Lorena, to have you here. We speak constantly, you and I, but it's always a pleasure to listen to you. And today, more than ever in the session, I feel very joyful to have you here. Please go ahead. Thank you, Enrique. Good evening, good morning, good night, wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much for the kind invite, and congratulations, HIC, for this wonderful initiative to promote this co-learning spaces of a collective reflection, not only between the organizations but also between the regions, the different cultures, countries, languages. This is part of the wonderful wealth of the coalition that it's had ever since it started more than 45 years ago. So I celebrate, I applaud this initiative so that we can go deeper into this discussion. Now, I'll try to share my screen if that's okay with you. Let's see if it works. Can you see my screen? There it is. I think it's okay, right? Can you see it? Okay. So I'll try to speak in Spanish while I read to my slides in English. It's going to be a little bit challenging, I guess. I hope I don't get confused, but I hope this can help the interpreters as well. And by the way, thank you, interpreters, for your support today. And thank you all to all of the participants who perhaps don't speak English and are relying on the interpretation. So I've been asked to speak about the process that different organizations carried out to have incidents on the No Global Agenda, Urban Agenda, which was approved in 2016, almost 5 years ago now. So in order for us to work to influence in the contents in the Right to a City, we did several strategies, and it was a bottom-up process, because many times we speak about how global agendas are being implemented locally and how to bring down, to have a top-down type of strategy, as if it was something, a flying saucer. That's what it sounds to me. Where do we land the flying saucer, the UFO? So let's look at it from a different perspective. Those agendas can have, and many times they do have, a very important component of proposals and reflections that are coming bottom up. Bottom up means from the municipalities, the communities, from the towns, from the eyes of civil society, to raise the voice and be heard by governments and UN system. This is the type of approach that I would like to present to you today. Let me tell you very briefly what the platform is about, for those of you who don't know about it. The inaugural meeting of the Global Platform for the Right to a City, when it was launched, was in November 2014 in Sao Paulo, Brazil. But we must say that actually the platform is fed by a system that went by for many decades, many different stakeholders. And It's not a coincidence that this happened in Brazil, because Brazil has been, ever since the 1980s at least, Brazil has been a very important lighthouse and inspiration for urban movements and the right to a city, not only in the Latin American region, but also it's influenced other parts of the world with very important breakthroughs. And by inspiring, guiding discussions within the framework of the World Social Fora that started in 2001 approximately. And it also started in Brazil, in Porto Alegre. So it's not a coincidence, it's not by chance that the launch of the platform happened there. It was not a random thing. It was created thanks to this process of so many organizations, so many people working together for such a long time. HIC was there, obviously. HIC played a paramount role back then. It was one of the most important networks to promote the launching of this platform, because HIC had accompanied the Brazilians for many decades, along with the Police Institute, where Enrique and other colleagues work. This is where we started speaking about how important it was for us to have a space for us to collaborate at different levels. So this space for us to gather around and organize ourselves is not just yet another organization, another formal network as such, but rather it's a place of joint action. It is a space in which we can carry out different initiatives, strengthen those that are already ongoing. And within the networks, I mentioned here some of the international and regional networks that promoted the organization, the launch of this platform ever since its inception, and some examples of some other more local organizations which have supported the activities ever since 2014. The list is very long. Many organizations in all of the continents, they're not all here, but you might see that there are some organizations that are more devoted to the land, to housing, to habitat. There are some other organizations that are more focused on economic, social solidarity practices, or informal economies, popular economies, as they're also known. There are some other organizations that work around a gender perspective, the defense of women and girls, and the connection to the cities, to urban matters. So it was a very diverse group of organizations, social movements, civil society organizations, professionals, academicians, but also, and this is something worth mentioning for what I'll explain next of the Habitat 3 process, the most strategic, most systematic alliance with the network of local and regional governments. The acronym in English is USLG, UCLG, the United Cities and Local Governments. It is a network that gathers local and regional governments all throughout the world now. And it is present all throughout the planet. So what were our goals? Very similar things to what HIC does and some other international networks as well, to build communities, to have a virtual or face-to-face community to share practices and knowledge, to strengthen local and national struggles, and to promote international mobilization, to advocate to have transformative changes in the short and the medium and the long term, and also to make certain that there's an implementation of the right to the city by means of acknowledging the legal frameworks, but also through policies, projects, budgets, and everything that is necessary. What were, and are still our main strategies for us to reach those objectives? Well, it's all about connecting. That's the key verb of the work we do, connecting actors, themes, scales of the different types of levels of the initiatives, but also Yolanda spoke about this, how important it is also to resist when there's a violation of the right, when there is violence, and come up with proposals of how we want the transformation to take place and how we want to have communities participate more. It's all about building shared visions and narratives. Paramount. It's extremely important for us to challenge, to question the current mainstream discourses that just want to keep the status quo or perhaps to have some regression in terms of the victories that we had achieved in the past for political and social change. It's also about using official spaces. And there's something that perhaps might be familiar to HIC because it's done it ever since it was created, to create official spaces, but also to create and maintain our own spaces for us to raise our voices, to do our advocacy, to get organized, especially including the most marginalized and excluded communities. It's all about also combining in-person and virtual mobilization and training and advocacy in general, and also to develop our own tools and methodologies for the right to the city. So this is a timeline, a very quick explanation of what we've done ever since it started. And some important landmarks, a very important challenge for the platform started because if you remember, it was created in 2014, but the new urban agenda was approved by the end of 2016. It was 2 years afterwards. That was not enough time. So we really needed to work really hard. And it was a twofold challenge because it's about creating a new space with some people who knew one another, but there were plenty of people we were not acquainted with, and also to have an advocacy and incidents and lobbying with local governments, regional governments, the United Nations system. It was a huge challenge. How is it that with this brand new organization, we create the trust, the political power to create the joint narratives of proposals, and we have an influence in those official spheres? It was very intense. And within and without the process, there were opportunities to participate within and without the official processes, but we came up with our own initiatives in the meantime. And we carry out different diverse actions, including engaging the communities. And we also created audiovisual materials and campaigns and documents, official documents, letters. We also had meetings, declarations, positioning, statements. The urban agenda is the final document that was agreed upon by the governments, but behind it, well, it took dozens of documents, including theme reports, meetings, and some other organization efforts. And we included the best of the proposals, and our document was actually more ambitious than the urban agenda, but anyway, that's why it didn't stop there. In 2017, after this very intense process to work with that agenda, we started working within to ask ourselves, and now what do we do? How do we make certain that this is applied and at different levels? So we had regional meetings, including a very large one that was organized along with HIC in Nairobi, in Kenya. And there we discussed the action plan that we're still currently applying. Now, going back to the urban agenda, it was very difficult for us to be heard, for us to incorporate collective proposals, because there was a lot of resistance from the official entities from some countries, including very powerful countries from an economic and political perspective, such as the US, China, Russia. They opposed several of the proposals of the right to the city, and they didn't want this to be mentioned, to be included, to be heard. So what we did was that we did many virtual mobilizations, a very big campaign to support the inclusion of the right to the city That happened in 2016. And this happened also so as to be able to reach the diplomats, the diplomatic missions. In Twitter, we spoke about the names of the people who would attend representing the countries, and we tweeted to them what we wanted to be heard in New York. This was very meaningful because we didn't only speak directly to the representatives from different delegations, but we also did other types of strategies and campaigns. So yes, we organized regional, national events so as to agree upon the proposals and have dialogue with different stakeholders to write articles for the media. We talked to the press. We did everything we could jointly so as to make noise and be heard. And one of the main aspects for us in our strategy was to gather not only us civil society actors, but we also included in our alliance the network of local and regional governments. You might wonder why. Why did you do that? Well, it's because in the United Nations system, perhaps you know this, people who have official seats with a voice and a vote are only the representatives of the national governments, the diplomats, the people from high above, civil society and local governments. We are left perhaps a bit outside. Sometimes we are allowed to speak, not always. Sometimes we are allowed to speak. There's a voice there, but we have no real say. We don't have a vote. So that is why we decided to reach conclusions and join forces. There are 5 points that summarize the agreements that we reached during those years. The first one, and it's been spoken about before, the importance of a human rights approach. This is something that should be obvious for the United Nations systems. It is supposed to be in their agenda. It should always be present in every single meeting, but it's not. So civil society and local governments, we needed to remind them that even if we spoke of local urban rights, human rights cannot be separated from that. And the second point is a territorial approach. It's not about certain groups who are defending their rights, but it's all about an integrated territorial approach, including communities, towns, all geographies. And something very important, Orlando spoke about this, as well as some other people in the beginning, the need, the possibility of promoting more public-private partnerships, a community rather, partnerships in the defense of these rights, and also to have greater local autonomy so that the municipalities, the local governments could have a stronger mandate and more power to be able to have progressive strategies, have access to more resources, because in many countries that is not the case. There are some countries that are more centralized and everything is commanded from a single point. And many times people far away have no chance to elect their representatives. So we wanted to promote more local autonomy and also to deepen democratic participation at all levels. So we were able to achieve through all of this work what we could, if you consider that there was so much resistance from very powerful actors, as I mentioned. And also it's important to say that debate on the right to the city was one of the hot potatoes, as we say, one of the 2 things that were more controversial amongst the delegations. And it risked the approval of the agenda because some governments were threatening that if the right to the city was included, they would not undersign. That's how bad it got. So the mere fact that now there's a mention to the right to the city was an important political achievement, but beyond that, and it's only mentioned there, Article 11 in the agenda. What's important to highlight is that the definition that you see here, which is part of a shared vision that the governments share, this vision is the one that was proposed from the global platform as the definition of right to the city and what we understand by that, with certain changes. And we'll see which ones, but basically this definition was the proposal that we sent them. Within our agenda, Articles 11 and 13 include most of what we consider are the strategic principles of the right to the city. How is it that we implement a right to the city? How is it materialized? By those principles that are shared by human rights, non-discrimination, gender equality, but also including some other specific things that are related to inclusive citizenship beyond the national status of people who inhabit land, a political participation that is much deeper from the local, from the slums, from, not only from direct participation, not only representative representation, ownership of the land in the city is something that is paramount for the right to the city, access and collective management of public spaces. And two things that Orlando mentioned, as well as the colleagues before me, the relevance of strengthening and acknowledging and strengthening diverse inclusive economies and the urban-rural links, because when we speak of the right to the city, it's not that we want to build more buildings or skyscrapers or that cities have to grow larger. No, no, no. We are thinking about the political community that is responsible to manage the resources for the people, for the planet, the places where they live in. So several things were acknowledged thanks to the work. Many of the principles that you see here are now in the agenda, including specific proposals and specific values such as preventing segregation, speculation, gentrification, evictions, and others, and also to support a wide array of housing options for the right to housing, acknowledging the contributions of the so-called informal economies, which is the economies of more than 60% of all global population. But there are some things that were left behind, such as this idea that we had proposed as cities as common goods, the rights of diverse communities, gender communities, LGBTQI were left outside because of the opposition of several governments. And what about democracy? The need to strengthen institutions and mechanisms. This was not mentioned. You won't find a single mention of how to strengthen democracies, and that's very serious. It was very worrisome back then, and now it's even worse with what's happening around the world. And social justice was never explicitly mentioned either. Enrique, how much time do I have left? Could you please start wrapping up? You have 2 minutes because we're about to finish here. All right, so I only have 2 more slides. What happened afterwards? Well, just as with the preparation, we continue with a strategy of within and without, a strategy that is very usual, very familiar to HIC and some other networks, to have an influence in official and spheres, but also to keep our own networks, to strengthen our own spaces of mobilization and action. So we have carried out different initiatives. Some of them have been very relevant with the help of local regional governments, like this commitment that several cities have signed for the right to the city, right to housing, and also to include very specific policies. And there are some other proposals that we've done. Meetings of governmental governments at an international arena with proposals to the right of the city. What is it that we can do from the local governments so as to make the right to city move forward? Some other proposals to review, to revisit local agendas, especially the electoral campaigns in Barcelona and some other French cities. Is the right to the city is reflected in those political agendas, or is it not? That was the purpose. And we've also done a lot of work with the communities. This is one of many examples. We had a discussion taking advantage that the UN was meeting, we were having our counter Congress with grassroots organizations, with organizations that were defending the right to housing or the right to nourishment, lots of urban agricultural experiences to be shared in New York and in other places. So ever since, we still continue working with our advocacy, with our lobbying to train people. Now we have virtual classes on what does the right of the city means, how is it implemented, mobilization activities around Urban October, that's the name of the campaign, with HIC and other networks, and also a strengthening of what is it that we understand as the right to the city and why is it so important in the current context. There are some theme reports that we have developed together, for instance, the right to the city and climate justice, and the impact of the pandemic on the right to the city, and why is it important to speak of the right to the city for the changes that we have to promote and the city as a common good, because we say this is something that was left outside of the urban agenda. And let me conclude by thanking everyone and by devoting this presentation and our work to all of the activists who are risking their lives in the communities, like Mariela Franco, may she rest in peace. She was killed in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, a very brave defender of the rights of the communities, the favelas, against the militarization of the slums, the favelas. And as so many other activists around the world, people who are still being criminalized and persecuted because they're defending the rights of our cities, we dedicate our efforts to her and our session to her. Thank you, Mariela, and thank you for attention.
Gracias, Lorena, y también por este fin.
Lorena, thank you. Thank you so much for this great presentation. Now, as Marielle, we have many other activists in our territory. HIC is carrying on a campaign for many colleagues that passed away recently in our countries. So I would like to join also with this solidarity. Many colleagues are fighting in their own realm, and they are suffering from threats as human rights activists. So this is a great time for us to be together in this coalition, fighting together against this violence. Now we have some time for Q&A, and feel free to ask questions to Sam or Lorena. However, if you have no questions, you can give us some feedback about how you are working in your own community with these SDGs. It's important to have feedback, to hear from you. What are you considering to carry out as advocacy work as an organization? How are you planning to implement these SDGs? Maybe it's before the new urban agenda, before the COP, or environmental matters, or there are other issues, the right to water. There are many issues that have to do with development that organizations are already addressing. And this is the right time for us to exchange experiences. And we can share something with Adriana and other regional coordinators. Silvia, Joseph are here, so they can contribute with you. They can talk about how HIC is organizing advocacy activities for these years. We have some important events like the World Urban Forum that is going to be carried out in June in Colony. We have another meeting for the UN regarding SDGs that is going to be carried out in New York in July. November, new COP about climatic crisis. So how HIC is considering political advocacy from the human rights perspective, taking into account a right to water, gender equity, that are important subject matters for HIC. So now we are going to have a Q&A session, and I would like to invite you to share with us your feedback. Adriana can walk us through different opportunities that HIC has in order to address all these subject matters. Well, the floor is open. You can raise your hand in order to have the floor and make your comments or questions.
Marie, ok, Marie, and después Areli. Marie, por favor.
First Marie and then Areli.
Obrigado, thank you. My question is to
Gracias.
my question is to, sorry, I'm still, no, I'm not in the translation. I was hearing the translation to both speakers. And that is whether the advocacy strategy also involves analyzing the resistance. And I'm thinking specifically on the right to the city. What exactly is it that China, Russia, but also the African region also didn't support, the African bloc of governments didn't support the right to the city and the new urban agenda either. Has there been an analysis of what the reason is? And I'm thinking, can one include that analysis in a strategy so that it's not, that it's kind of a buying over, winning over, not buying over, winning over, or to get into that headspace? I can understand, so the South African government might on local platforms support the right to the city, but we have the most unequal cities on the globe. What is the meaning of a government verbally saying they support the right to the city when they're not addressing a massive problem that China doesn't have? China's doing far better in delivering, services to poor households. And so there's, there is a level of hypocrisy, I think, or a level of, at least in the thinking, as I understand, in the thinking of China, probably a sort of they project, there is a little hypocritical in supporting the right to the city without really making real meaningful resource distributions and tangible changes. But that's the bigger, that's the bigger question between whether the focus is on civil rights or on social and economic rights and actual real delivery to the poor, as opposed to giving the poor democratic rights. And I think those are huge. Those are huge debates if one is going to be addressing the bigger regional, the sort of geopolitical resistance to the right to the city. But I mean, for Sam, a similar question would be whether Pamoja is also analyzing the resistance to the more transformative planning forms that Pamoja is advocating for. It's just these are huge questions and not easy to resolve. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marie. Areli, you raised your hand. You have the floor. Thank you. This is a question for both speakers, for Lorena and for Sam. Can you, if you could select or mention the main obstacle that you see in Kenya, Samuel, or Lorena, with the global platform view, what do you think is the main obstacle that once you have advocacy in the global development platforms, accomplish their implementation at a national level? Would you like to mention some of the main obstacles or challenges so we can know where we can direct our main strategies once we have accomplished this great goal? Thank you for those questions. Are there any other people that would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Entonces, quizás podemos volver la
So
palabra a
I think that now we can give the floor to Sam and Lorena so they can address these questions. And then we will open the floor for other people, for other people from HIC organization, the secretariat or the chair can say something. Lorena, Sam, would you like to speak out and say something?
I request that my senior Lorena go first.
Are you sure? No estoy segura en qué idioma hacerlo ahora. Supongo que sigo en español para no marear.
I'm not sure in which language I'm going to be speaking. I'm going to switch to Spanish. Thank you for these questions. Marie's voice was kind of chopped, so I didn't get her comment completely. However, I understand that it's a similar question to the one that Areli made, the level of hypocrisy between commitments adopted by national governments and how they are not being implemented at a local level and how they can transform the marginalized communities. And the more focus on political rights, civil rights, or a more formal democracy dispute. In general terms, the redistribution of resources, more economic justice. This is an everyday problem, not only the right to city. It's not exclusive to that. But I would like to say that from the work of our organizations and from the work of this platform, we are not naive. We are not expecting for governments to do what they are promising. This is just lip service. We just push them in order to have more ambitious promises. But we know that they are not going to fulfill even half of them without a constant social mobilization. Historically, we know that all the rights are social conquers. There are not concessions from the top to the bottom. These are struggles, social fights. Like in the case of South Africa, many lives have been lost all over the world from thousands of years ago. And we are aware of that. We know that it's not enough to have something written in a document. However, we think it's important for us, so later on we can highlight contradictions and we can pinpoint hypocrisy, and also to have a shared vision as a society of the things that we do want. Someone mentioned that oftentimes we focus on criticizing what is wrong of the things that we don't want, what is missing, and everything that has been destroyed. So then we need to put energy in the things that we want to accomplish from the platform, from the organizations. We focus on that, trying to build this shared vision on what do we want? How do we imagine cities and different territories? Samuel already mentioned that. For that, we need constant participation from all the sectors and from the stakeholders mainly. And because we don't believe in national governments and in international and multilateral agencies, that's why we have this strategy to focus more on joint work with local and national governments, not because they are better, not because they are good, but because in many cases there is political will to do that, but they are lacking, like the civil society, resources. They lack possibilities to mobilize resources, or they don't have the institutional framework that is the most appropriate one. We know that this is not possible in many places, and we understand that there are national and regional conditions that are very different. However, it has been our strategy. And another concept, mobilizing society as a whole beyond the organizations that we work in, how we can outreach our proposals, our analysis to the general society by using different social media, being able to talk with journalists, and conveying these messages in a different way, in a relevant manner for current events. So trying to have a social commitment to how necessary it is to change. Pandemic highlighted the fact that there are bad things, but when there is political will, resources are reallocated to do something, and it can be done. So we know that it is possible. We know that principles and values that we are defending are the ones that are going to transform the society in a positive sense. So it's a matter of keep on pressing in that regards. And regarding what Areli mentioned, there are many obstacles, but three very fast. One, we focus only on the fact that the public or the private sector are going to do things, are going to solve or not issues. And there is always the lack of the social discourse. So the social sector is fragmented or is erased, or is focusing only on family assistance. So we need to focus on them, because they are the ones that they are doing the transformation. Organized communities, civil society are having transformations, short-term view, and the lack of consistency among policies. The policy for housing can promote something, but the economic policy is going to destroy everything or to make the gap even larger. And we also have to take into account electoral agendas and backlashes. That's why the human right is talking about the how mandatory is to have a progress in all these policies, because we have seen backlashes everywhere in all the fields, not only in housing and in dwellings, but we have seen backlashes in the north, not only in the global south. Sam, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much. So I'll deal specifically with the main obstacles and how I see it. One of the things that I see is in relation to the place of the private sector in delivering basic services. And when states report, then they don't report on the quality. They normally report on the quantity, that we've constructed 1,000 houses. But then they don't report on the quality in terms of accessibility, in terms of affordability, and many more. You know, imagine during a pandemic, a bank that is sitting at the steering committee to deliver social housing in Kenya, recording over 100% profit. Is it not immoral? You know? Yeah. So then that's one of the things that we need to deal with. But to what extent can the state contract the private sector? And to what extent should the state embed community innovations as a basis of driving social change? It's normally been that it's the private sector that has got the solutions, which is not true. Communities themselves have got innovations to deliver basic services. When you go to Kibra, which is one of the biggest informal settlements in Kenya, they have organized themselves to have housing. So then how can this be translated to be a policy approach? They have organized themselves to have water. through organized community groupings, how is this reflected within the policy documents? So that then it is legitimized, then it's reflected before then we go to what, conventional planning regimes may sometimes or perhaps refer to as the ideal. Secondly, I've got one of the greatest fear that communities have been impoverished and they are becoming more vulnerable to an extent that they are having apathy in engaging with these platforms, which is one of my greatest fears because it takes down solidarity. They've been discriminated, they've been abused, and that they feel their value as a people to be able to collectivize. So then this takes me to the place of, the political debate on access to basic services. That to what extent are our communities politically sound to know that their inability to access services is connected to the politics of division of revenue and how it's allocated and how it's used. So that then those who do not support their interests are voted down at the local level, and that there's a political pain that is associated with particular decisions that the political class makes. So that even when the country makes commitments at the global level, then it boils down to the decisions that your local member of an assembly is responsible to. And that's what we are trying to do in Kenya now, that community members are developing their community manifestos that we shall insist must be reflected in planning documents, and that their innovations must be legitimized into policy documents, not what, policymakers and bureaucrats and the elites will prescribe to be the ideal medicine and tablets to cure, some of the social problems that are occasioned by the political class. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for answering and commenting this question. Sam, you had your, Ahmed, you raised your hand. Would you like to make a comment or a question? Otherwise, I would like to give the floor to Ahmed. It's going to be very interesting to learn about HIC's regional's proposals on how our membership is being organized and how they are planning to have advocacy work in these key moments of the SDGs. Ahmed, you have the floor.
Thanks, Henrik, and I will speak in
Muchísimas
Arabic.
gracias. Voy a hablar en árabe. Sorry.
Thank you, Lorena. Thank you, Sam, for these excellent presentations. They shed light to a great extent on the role of advocacy on the local and national levels. And this demonstrates to us on the national and local levels the challenges that we have faced in the Middle East and North Africa. We do not have the idea of local governments. If Marina or Suzanne from Lebanon or Hala, they know very well that we have the local authorities that are controlled by the centralized authority. They do not enjoy the independence in order to play their roles independently in a decentralized way away from the government or the centralized authority. And this is a major challenge that creates a type of dealing with the local authorities in order for them to understand, to start with, if they are a party to implementing the obligations of the SDGs or international obligations. And this puts us in the challenge of how to convince local authorities and the municipalities, which are part of the local authorities, that they are party to commitment to implementing the international human rights obligations, particularly also with relation to the right to the city, how the local authorities can accommodate this and understand this as part of the centralized government, and this is part of all spheres of government as part of this commitment. If the other regions have information or knowledge that they can provide us in the MENA region on how to deal with the municipalities and the local authorities to convince them that they are party and that are obliged to implement these international obligations. Thank you.
Mil gracias, Ahmed. Y ahora veo que creo que
Ahmed,
Silvia.
thank you so much. I think that Silvia and Manuel raised their hands. Yes. Hi, Silvia. Well, I am HIC Latin America. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. And I'm going to be speaking Spanish if you need to change the language channel. I would like to share with you an experience that we implemented in Latin America. Enrique, Areli, other people have regarding SDGs. Last year, our membership asked us to help you to understand how to materialize SDGs, how to make sense about them, how to really monitor progresses at a municipal and local level. There is a concern because there are resources from international cooperation to do this work. And this is not the only reason to do that, but there are new projects to do that. What is the problem? Well, there's no real invitation, even though we have local authorities in Latin America. In these Latin American countries where our membership is implemented, we don't have a partnership at a municipal level between authorities that have a lot of responsibility implementing SDGs and organized groups. So very unique things are happening from my perspective. They are respectful but unique. Exercise to materialize this alternatively from the ones that the authorities are carrying out without a real articulation, without taking into account learnings in the communities. So they don't know to whom outreach to ask for the results. So we organized 3 workshops last year in Latin America. In the first workshop, SGUL, this articulation of United Cities, was part of the workshop. They work with municipal authorities to materialize SDGs. So I think that we need to keep on working with these actors. In this exercise to materialize SDGs, we need to invite organizations as well. So this can be done in a coordinated manner. This is a subject matter for advocacy that it's easy to fulfill, taking into account that as HIC, we have good conversations with SCUL. At a national level, in every country, there's few participation from our organizations in spaces where they draft the national reports. So as Lorena was already mentioning, there's few participation, few opening for local governments in this international fora. And that's why HIC sometimes has been linked to governments in order to have a coordinator advocacy work with other actors. The same is happening in the drafting of national reports, where the country is drafting national reports, but it's not clear the methodology that they use to have conversations with their local organizations. We know that they invite organizations that deal with the development to work with the SDGs, but they don't.
Que nos planteaba Christian Curtis existe de forma muy clara o debería existir entre estos mundos.
There is a gap between the world of development and the world of human rights. But this is something that we can say from the organizations because we are learning this, we are including this in our speeches.
Esto nos sigue dividiendo en
pending that the countries understand that. So that's why they broken down everything in different groups, but they don't try to articulate different agendas, even though United Nations have requested this. They don't have to have different reports for human rights or advocacies. Some governments have done that. I remember some documents from the north of Europe, reports where they are trying to articulate all these subject matters. So what is happening? SDGs 11 are addressed shallowly by organizations of development. So when some of our organizations have taken part from Latin America in high-level political fora and in the non-governmental groups that can ask questions to the governments about their own reports, we have noticed that because they were not invited since the very beginning and they were able to jump in late in the process, well, our organizations find a document that is not including anything with urban matters. And this has been the case in Argentina, Peru, and other countries. They speak a lot about poverty, they speak a lot about education and many things, but in the cases of the last reports, they don't talk about SDG 11. And that's just an example. As sometimes there is a delay or a gap between the local, the municipal, and the global issues. And there is a full lack of knowledge about what is happening at a national level in the drafting and in the report. And they don't know anything about what is happening at a high level in political fora. And when we ask them about what's the level of advocacy that they are interested in the SDGs, they don't know anything about that. So this is the picture that we have. So we need to work with advocacy, with CGLU, and we need to keep on organizing workshops because our main demand is to have a shared methodology of following up and monitoring SDGs, especially SDG 11. So a strategy that in a collective manner will allow us to assess what is really happening with large obstacles that we are facing regarding access to the real data. I remember that, well, Brazil has a very interesting exercise. The government has indicators for SDGs. This is extremely rare, but very complicated. And we are going to keep on doing all these exercises regarding the urban agenda. Lorena already explained what we did with the global platform. Honestly, I think that there's few interest monitoring the urban agenda. It was due to the pandemic, of course. It depends also on the fact that governments haven't opened a space for debate. There is a regional report about the progress of the new urban agenda. Several countries took part. I have it in English. I haven't seen yet in Spanish for the membership. Several countries took part, but with different methodologies. I received a very unique interview And I don't know what is the result of that. I think that members from Brazil had interviews about the progress that were more structured, but I don't know what is going to be the final result of this regional report. I think that the membership is not fully participating regarding the international advocacy. They really don't know how to make use of this new agenda at a local level. We are always trying to articulate different agendas from HIC. Every time that we talk about the agendas, if something is happening at an international level, we have to include that. So I apologize for taking a lot of time, but I wanted to share with you my overview. Thank you so much. I think that it's important to learn about what is happening in the region. We are kind of late.
We are perhaps
but
already
if you would like to stay a
running out
little
of time
bit more,
quickly, but now we have the great pleasure to have our dear
we
president
have
from HIC,
Adriana Allen, HIC's
and
chair.
she has so
She
many
has a lot of international
so
commitments, but she's
she's
here
here
with us.
today, making a wonderful
Sorry,
effort to be
Enrique,
here.
we seem to be having two English interpretations. Okay.
Entonces, querida Adriana, la palabra es tuya.
Mil gracias, Enrique. I shift now to English, and I promise to be very, very brief because I know that we are over time, and I know that this is a lot of pressure for the interpreters as well. I guess that perhaps one of the best things I could do is going through the many notes I took today, just to try to think a bit about some reflections that articulate this session with the next one. So in the next one, the whole objective is to get ready, ready for action. And I know that in the next session, there will be room to really talk in much more detail about the key processes that HIC is engaging with, why, and how you can, how can everyone connect to those processes and those efforts. So I'm not going to talk about that, which was my initial intention, but perhaps just to reflect a bit, and again, very briefly, about a few things that I think that are very important as commonalities that I heard throughout the discussion today, both in what Lorena and Samuel said, big thanks to both, but also in all the interventions that we had. And I think that, the key issue of today's session was really about this, what perhaps Mary put as connecting. Not only we talk about connecting regions, connecting scales, connected themes, but I think that Mary put something very important on the table, which is the connection between civil and political rights on the one hand, which seem to be treated by one type of advocacy processes, if you wish, and the other one on socioeconomic, and I would add environmental rights. And I think that one of the critical things that everyone was expressing when talking particularly around issues of implementation was the inevitable need and the urgent need to connect both. This is what we try to bring to the fore in the Habitat Voices of HIC, which, if you look at it in a way, it tries to encapsulate, is a document that was collectively built, and try to encapsulate what are some of the key principles, regardless of the topic, regardless of whether we are targeting, putting pressure or expanding the word around the COP, the Convention of the Parties, around the Commission on the Status of Women, whatever the process is, what are we trying to push for? And then we talk about 5 key principles that very much unify what HIC does. On the one hand, we talk about fair redistribution. And here, clearly, we're talking about what Samuel, what Mary, what many of you highlighted in terms of the importance of seeing that these civil and political rights really translate into concrete changes for women and men and girls and boys. The second one is that one of reciprocal recognition. And this is extraordinarily important because that is a constant reminder that even in the existence and theory of human rights, there are huge gaps. There are groups that continue to fall through the net. And so the issue of recognition and the issue of targeting particularly, who are those who continue to fall through the net? Are there tenants? Are they, are there people with, a certain sexual orientations? And so we really need to keep on hammering on that. We talk about the third one, which is parity of political participation. And I want to come back to that in a second. Of course, peace, not war, and this is something very important that Hala highlighted at the beginning. Where do you start in context of conflict, where even many of the issues that we have discussing have no legs at all, because any possibility for development, for existence, for coexistence is suspended. And we also talk about solidarity, but in addition or in combination with responsibility. And we think that this is very important because we have seen in the context of COVID, we have seen this appeal, particularly to the capacity of organized civil society to deploy amazing levels of solidarity, but very often not accompanied by the responsibility of local, regional, and national governments to support those processes. So I invite you to look at the Habitat Voices and just to read through those and see whether they resonate with you, because in a way they help structuring different fights. Now, going back to the principle of building parity of political participation, I think that this defines in a nutshell what advocacy is about. What we talk all the time was precisely about the fact that we are trying to push for changes, for fundamental, for transformative changes in a context, in situations of significant power asymmetry. And this is why it's not just about participating, but about building that parity, having more than that seat. No, I think that Lorena and Silvia both were referring about the fact of, how is that civil society at best might have a seat to listen or to talk, but not even to vote on a decision. So expanding the room for that parity of political participation is crucial. Now, what seems to be some crucial ingredients in that that you all mentioned? One is this constant reading of the context of that very complex environment in which we work and a critical engagement with it. I think that in all the interventions we saw that the context changes all the time. The challenges change all the time. We saw that through COVID when a lot of challenges seem sadly to be sidelined. Not that they disappeared, but they went to the background and more emergency situations came to the fore. So that critical engagement, which is also very contextual, thinking about some of the points that Ahmed was raising, is essential and requires very specific capacities. How do we read this constant map? I think that the second one has to do with the recognition of something that you said, that on advocacy in what we are doing and in what HIC is doing is dealing with two things. On the one hand is fighting against, but also fighting for. And I think that was very, very clear. So of course we are talking about fighting against discrimination, fighting against forced evictions, but also this fighting for, this articulation of visions, of alternatives, of different ways of doing things is extraordinarily important. And this is something that is very clear in the body of HIC membership. And I think that's something really to explore. How do we, when we are fighting for something, we are also doing advocacy, and we need to connect those two fights. The presentation by Samuel, I thought, was extraordinarily clear in that sense. Third point, I think that Lorena talked about the importance of constantly reframing the conversation and reframing the narrative. And this is important because very often it's not so much that we are talking about something new. Sometimes we are not talking about something new, but we are talking about something that might sound old, but from a different perspective. This can be seen, for instance, in the push we're trying to put forward in bringing, say, a feminist perspective to the way we talk about housing rights, land rights, or even climate justice. And this is essential. So the reframing the conversation, but also reframing the action. I think that, and I stop very shortly, I think that another very important point, which we cannot underestimate, is that of building alliances. We cannot we cannot even think of achieving or much of an impact or much of a meaningful impact in the fights we take forward without very critical and strategic alliances. And I think that we saw that, and those alliances change over time. And I think that that's also something very important in terms of that critical engagement with the map. Who do we work with? Whose muscle? Who do we add muscle to in those fights? I think that I just want to conclude with something Lorena said. Rights are not concessions. Rights are the outcome of long-term fights and struggles. And I think that we also need to bear in mind the temporality, that very long-term strategy, sustaining the energy, even when the fight seems to apparently change, is extraordinarily important. I know that these are all ingredients and capacities. How do we do that? How do we sustain the fight? How do we work with others? How do we identify the critical nodes where we need to target a specific action and so on, are going to be part of the next session. So many, many thanks for today's session to all.
Super gracias, querida Adriana, por esta
Thank you so much, Adriana, for that very important summary and your input as well. Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for letting us stay here a bit longer. To the interpreters, to the participants, thank you for staying for 15 more minutes. And to our guests, Samuel, Lorena, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for being here. Your contributions were beautiful. Thank you indeed. Now, next week, it'll be the last session of our co-learning space. And I would like to invite all of the participants very, very warmly to be there, to attend the last meeting, because it is going to be one that will be devoted to get ready for the practice. Hala will facilitate that session next week, and we are thinking about rethinking how we practice political incidents or advocacy rather. Thank you very much. And don't forget to check out the Google Classroom, because there'll be 2 very simple questions for you to answer on this Sustainable Development Agenda. And how are you perhaps engaged this year? Are you participating? Will you participate? Are you proposing things for the World Global Forum? And so in the beginning of next session, perhaps we could come back to the subject and to speak about who will be doing what and how we can collaborate. So basically, thank you so much. And you're all invited to meet next Wednesday. Hala, Emmanuel, and the pedagogical team. Thank you for everything. See you next week.
Fantastic. Are we just the team?
We are just the team. Yes, agreed. Well done, everyone.
I only stayed to give you a big clap.
I'm sorry for so short time, Adriana. For you.
No, not at all. I just reached what
you did great. It was perfect.
I don't know, but I just did what I had planned. That's okay. But that was amazing. That was really an amazing session. And I want to apologize for having been unable to join the other 2 sessions. I listened to them, the recorded ones, and you are doing a fantastic work. So well done, Hala, well done, Enrique, and well done, Emmanuel, and of course, Areli.
We've got, with our interpreters, we've got 12 more minutes. Actually, we can stop the recording, I think. Should we do that? Everyone who's recording locally, I'll just stop. Yeah.